Okay, we're going to start our next session. We have Daniel Genua from the Department of Homeland Security. His session is on the perspectives of cybersecurity and infrastructure resilience. Give him a hand.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me today. The lunch crowd, a strong crowd. So I'm excited to be here. Doesn't matter what the hour is. Excited to be here today to speak to you all. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. Probably don't appreciate speaking after Susie Adams from Microsoft. Did she leave? I don't see her anymore. I've seen Susie Adams speak a number of different times. In terms of the federal perspective, she's as professional gets. And whenever you're the Department of Homeland Security or any federal agency representative, you never want to be after Microsoft when you're talking about cybersecurity perspectives. So hopefully I'll endeavor to keep this in a space where I can hit the ball for you and hopefully add some value in a different way than she was able to provide information earlier. My goal today is to provide perspectives on cybersecurity and critical infrastructure resilience, hopefully focusing on how you can do that, how you can work with especially a non-technical community. Any cybersecurity professionals here, any IT subject matter experts here? One, good, might as well go and get some lunch. I'm afraid I'm not going to have a lot to add to your expertise. I'm hoping to bring this to a non-technical community. My background in the last 15 years has been spent studying the interdependencies of energy, water, communications, transportation systems with the Office of Infrastructure Protection. And so very begrudgingly adopted this discipline of focusing on cybersecurity and IT and OT systems that sustain and enable those functions as a component of a larger system of systems. And so getting up to speed, but not there yet. Best case for this presentation. Again, I'll provide you with some interesting stories, some nuanced insights of some of the things that the Department of Homeland Security is doing, get you to lunch on time or to our next speaker on time, and as a result of this 30 minutes, none of you will have been hacked, at least as a result of my presentation. I'm with the Office of Infrastructure Protection. It's a tiny office out of the Department of Homeland Security, and I'm a protective security advisor. If you've never heard of me, or had never heard of us, you've never heard of me, I know that. If you've never heard of us, there's about 100 protective security advisors around the nation. There's one protective security advisor in every state, and just about one in every major city. The job, when you condense it down to its kind of simplest, its fundamental role, is to work with critical infrastructure owners and operators and folks within that environment to reduce risks to critical infrastructure, really to compel them to increase the security and resilience characteristics of the infrastructure assets that they own and operate that enable our way of life. I talked about electric power, water, wastewater, natural gas, communications, transportation systems. When I'm talking about the profession, the Protective Security Advisor, the acronym PSA, I'll call your attention to the last letter in the acronym, the A, advisor. And so we're really there to provide advice on some things that you could do or that the critical infrastructure owner and operator community could do to advance their security and resilience profile. And when I say advice, what I would like you to infer is that everything I'm talking about is of course, voluntary and non-regulatory. So there's no reason for this community to work with us other than they truly care about making improvements and advancing the maturity of the systems that they own and operate to sustain the functions that they're responsible for. My goal for today's presentation is to provide you with an overview of our flagship program, the Regional Resiliency Assessment Program, and to discuss the way that program is working to frame a risk management approach that considers both cyber and physical elements of risk for your general consideration. So what I'll do first is provide you with an overview of the RRAP, the Regional Resiliency Assessment Program, and then spin off into a couple little vignettes, a couple of case studies of some ways we've been able to use this program to influence risk management decisions, touching on physical infrastructure systems that you're going to be very familiar with, and the cyber components of those systems that enable them to operate. So can I do this? There we go. So the RRAP is the Regional Resiliency Assessment Program. It's really a program that administers a series of cooperative assessments looking at infrastructure protection, elements of Department of Homeland Security. We work with our partners at CS&C, that's the Office of Cyber Security and Communications, and then other elements of the federal government to assess systems and assets within a designated area. And the important thing to note here is there's a geographic pin we can stick on a map and say, okay, here's where we're working this regional resiliency assessment. PSAs, Protective Security Advisors, use the regional resiliency assessments to serve as strategic partnerships on multiple levels. So we're working with the private sector, public utilities, state and local officials, and regional federal counterparts. For example, the Coast Guard's Area Maritime Security Committee, or the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Waterborne Infrastructure Team. Our role is to administer advice to each of those levels of customers on a regular basis. So PSAs are frequently interacting with various communities in their area of responsibility, and therefore generally have a comprehensive, I won't call it comprehensive, we generally have a fairly good and adequate understanding of regional priorities and common concerns across the customer base. And if those priorities seem to be focusing on kind of one common thing, if there's a common thread that you can pull across these communities, a need for disaster hazard planning, a focus on supply chain vulnerabilities, or uncertainty surrounding continuity of operations, PSAs will begin to start building a coalition of partners to start addressing the characteristics of this problem statement. From that point, a Protective Security Advisor would develop a nomination for a Regional Resiliency Assessment Program. They'll submit the nomination to the IP Assistant Secretary, and then they'd select the IP Assistant Secretary would select the project depending on its alignment to national priorities. All this happens prior to these vignettes I'm going to unravel for you, but I want to explain, I think it's important to note some of the fundamental characteristics of success, prior to one of these types of projects kicking off. A clearly defined issue or knowledge gap, a coalition of partners, and consensus surrounding priorities. Once a regional resilience assessment kicks off, the focus is on characterizing the infrastructure system. So what are the discrete components of a system? How do they work together to enable that core operations of that system? At the highest level, our methodology is to identify a critical service or function within a geographic area and then begin examining the processes that enable that function and corresponding assets and nodes. This will include identification and really cataloging of equipment and facilities, IT, OT, information technology, operational technology, personnel and policies that play a key role in sustaining or influencing the critical service or function we're assessing. Additionally, we're trying to catalog corresponding lifeline dependencies. When I'm talking about lifeline, again, back to the electric systems or electric assets, the water assets, wastewater assets, transportation, communications, and fiber assets that provide utilities and services supporting those first-level assets. Once we've built out that picture, kind of a beautiful map, as it were, a diagram of all of these disparate components that support a system. Now, consider a port. Or when you consider a port, there is, the function of the port is to enable transportation of goods through the port. So goods come into the port, they're housed at the port, and they go through a port. And there are federal counterparts, there are terminal operators, there's local security, there's multiple transportation nodes. Once you've painted that picture, then we're looking at, okay, which of those assets are the most critical in this perspective? And then what are the resilience characteristics of those specific assets, the planning, mitigation, response, and recovery elements in play at that asset level, and then across the community to try to identify gaps in their resilience and risk management posture. Once we've built this understanding, we deliver our findings back to the various customers in the form of reports, technical publications, decision support tools, GIS images or diagrams. And these will include recommendations for how the system could be more resilient, and then start to work to actually implement those options for considerations, not recommendation, or again, remember the regulatory connotation. This slide here represents kind of lessons learned. You got to forgive the slides, right? Department of Homeland Security, I'm a bureaucrat. I got acronyms and slides. This is what I've got today for you guys. This slide right here represents kind of critical best practice or lesson learned observed over time, which is that these recommendations that we deliver and administer through these regional resiliency assessments have to be tailored to the customer community that's going to receive them. That would make a lot of sense in the framework of today's presentations. You don't want to come with 300-level IT cybersecurity recommendations and deliver those to a state employee who is only notionally aware that IT exists at all to support the system that he's worried about. So if there's lack of understanding, lack of risk awareness, you're looking at foundational recommendations. So let's work to discern a vision or a strategy, some indicators of a commitment to seriousness in the discipline of physical and cybersecurity. Up to the top where if folks are much more serious and much more informed about these challenges, they're going to be more likely to make long-term investments, either in business approaches, capital investments, changing policies surrounding this area. Okay, so delivering analytic products to support this understanding, and then working to facilitate the adoption of these things is kind of the core crux of the program. So what I'll do now is pivot to a couple of different projects to try to color in this understanding of the program through a couple project-specific vignettes. First, the ports of North Carolina, and then to looking at water systems in Arizona. In the instance of the North Carolina ports projects, we're specifically talking about the ports of Wilmington and Moorhead, as well as several inland ports. The Protective Security Advisor has been working with state counterparts regularly to kind of get a better understanding of the challenges that the state officials had with the port in terms of understanding risks, overall risks and risk management to the port. These ports are publicly owned by the state of North Carolina, represent a major component of the state's economy, along with a transportation hub nationally and internationally. Cargo and containers transit the port to domestic and international locations. A key issue of concern from the various partners in this sphere, the state, the Port Authority, and the Area Maritime Security Committee, was that these partners had a limited understanding of the IT systems and assets that supported critical port operations across the spectrum of activities, across the spectrum of partners that operated the port or interacted to sustain port operations. Meaning that obviously the Coast Guard has a good grasp on the IT and OT systems that they leverage, and terminal operators may have a good grasp on IT and OT systems they leverage, but there isn't kind of an encyclopedic understanding of how these things come together. The questions that they were most concerned with: to what extent could different IT disruptions impact port operations, and how susceptible were these IT systems to disruptions? Ultimately were kind of the common questions that coalesced this coalition of support around this regional resiliency assessment project. Okay. From there, the Regional Resiliency Assessment Team began their efforts to characterize IT infrastructure that enables critical port operations. We used a mix of IP and Coast Guard analytic work, research, and interviews with the port communities. The cataloging of the system that occurred included looking at the container handling systems, electronic data interchanges, warehouse inventory management system, the warehousing systems, and then the crane systems and personnel workstations where people are physically doing work to move cargo through the ports. For each of those systems, the team began to conduct a battery of assessments and interview different stakeholders to gain an understanding of the physical and cybersecurity vulnerabilities and postures of those assets and the relationship between those assets. We conducted physical security assessments on the data centers that house port data, and also on the access controls behind terminal operators and behind publicly owned port infrastructure. We also conducted cybersecurity assessments on Port Authority assets in order to identify gaps in cybersecurity personnel and planning considerations, and to assess the IT system's ability to disrupt a facility's functionality. This approach, the approach we took for this project, can best be understood through the infographic that was created. This visual was actually requested by the North Carolina Area Maritime Security Committee that has a desire to extend this methodology beyond kind of the port work that was done as a part of this regional resiliency assessment to replicate its outcomes. This approach establishes a maturity level indicator to benchmark where specific customers or systems are in terms of their cybersecurity and resilience capability, and is sourced from the cybersecurity maturity model from DOE and Carnegie Mellon. Am I mic'd up if I step away, or can I take the mic? Well, it's okay. What you're looking at across the top is your maturity level indicator, essentially some very key elements of cybersecurity maturity that we're conditioned to look for at the outset of an interview with a different participant in the port environment. So maturity level 0, there's not a cybersecurity plan in place, indicates that this partner, this person who has a critical role in sustaining port operations, has no degree of seriousness around to which they consider cybersecurity. All the way to cybersecurity maturity indicator level 3, performs self-assessments and growth according to an emerging environment, contributes to the community. Okay, now we're looking at indicators, markers, as it were, of a much more mature, much more established organization in terms of how they consider cybersecurity. And what you're looking at here in the target chart is different disciplines for assessments. So general risk assessments, vulnerability assessments, audit and repair assessments, and planning assessments. And in the target itself, looking at maturity level 1 being less mature and maturity level 3 in the center being more mature, corresponding cybersecurity assessments that are applicable to those customers depending on their maturity level. And so, for example, these, I'm not sure if the acronyms will mean something to you. All of these are available either through DHS or they're available just off the internet. You could download, for example, the Cyber IST or the Cyber Resilience Review off of the Department of Homeland Security's websites. Looking at, okay, if this organization is kind of, all indications are this is a less mature organization. Let's look at some of their CR, Cyber Resilience Review. Let's look at some of their management practices. What are these folks doing to create a resilient organization as it uses IT infrastructure? And we'll stop there. Versus if we're looking at a much more mature organization, let's look at active monitoring or Shodan to kind of get a better sense of what audit and repair activities taking place in and around that system are going to look like. As a result of this approach, our team identified a number of opportunities to enhance the resilience of IT systems supporting critical functions. The team identified physical and cyber vulnerabilities to increase risk to port operations and provided that information to partners for awareness. The network structures assessment found malware on the terminal operating system that was then mitigated, so we were actually able to identify malware through these assessments and then work with the port to mitigate to really remove the malware. Our team also facilitated the delivery of industrial control systems, cyber emergency response team training for cybersecurity on industrial control systems to create a common understanding across different IT personnel from different organizations. So we're able to bring various customers together, various partners together in a room and kind of baseline their understanding of IT and OT security best practices. And most importantly, our key findings, the things that we learned from conducting these assessments in this way, indicated that there was a lack of sufficient dedicated IT and cybersecurity personnel available to the state to effectively implement IT and OT best practices. And as a result of this, the state of North Carolina was able to receive authorization to hire additional IT personnel to staff against the North Carolina State Port Authority. So that's one kind of methodology that we've used with this regional resiliency assessment to look at disparate units, disparate assets or nodes that support a common function in their own unique way and provide a kind of a holistic understanding of the cybersecurity resilience characteristics in place and things you can do to actually get better from where you are that's tailored to this specific customer. A second project that kind of did a very similar thing totally differently was this Arizona Water and Cybersecurity Project. This project sought to assist the Arizona Department of Homeland Security with fulfilling their goal of assessing cybersecurity resilience to Arizona's municipal water sector treatment and distribution systems. So we looked at a half dozen water and wastewater treatment plants across the state of North Carolina. The cities that we assessed covered approximately 40% of the population of the state of North Carolina, and then wanted a better understanding of what the state could do to advance their resiliency to a human-caused threat of cyber attack. This project focused on the challenge of securing strictly ICS and SCADA-dependent water sector systems, looking at the Central Arizona project, the major kind of water project, and then kind of related water infrastructure. Obviously, exploitation of water sector cyber-dependent ICS and SCADA could have physical and operational consequences, but the state kind of lacked the context, or how seriously could a hack or a cyber threat, what would be the consequences of an attack or a disruption, an IT disruption on the state's ability to deliver water to the people that live there. For this project, we developed a totally different approach than what was used for North Carolina. In North Carolina, we were looking at disparate assets and systems that all kind of worked up to one function. But when you're looking at water utilities across the state, they're all utilities. They are independent of one another, but they're really constructed very similarly based on the geographic characteristics of the state of Arizona and the regulatory environment and standards that water infrastructure has to be built to. So for this project, instead of looking at the unique kind of components of each system or really having to assess the maturity level of each system, we cataloged the critical IT and OT systems supporting each water treatment plant, and then identified the systems that were commonly found across each system. So as you got water treatment plant. Each of these water treatment plants are using some variety of ICS or SCADA systems to govern different functions that support the physical infrastructure. And so what are those core functions? What are those core ICS or SCADA systems that affect those functions? And then how do we assess those things? And so once we identified those core systems, we identified a consistent battery of assessments to put those systems through. This gave us an opportunity to identify vulnerabilities at each site, but also provided us with the opportunity to compare the results at each site to determine which best practices were being employed, who was kind of out in front, leading the state industry, as it were, in adopting best practices or adopting a more mature posture for cybersecurity at these water utilities, and also enabled us to kind of roll the results up together to give the state a more comprehensive understanding of, okay, here's a bigger picture for risk, to inform your risk management framework as it relates to this critical sector in the state of Arizona. Next slide. The state benefited from having this more thorough understanding of cybersecurity and risk posture at the water utility across each utility that we assessed. And then the utility also, of course, benefits from gaining information from the assessments that were actually conducted there. And so as a result, each utility gets a report or gained a report saying, here's some things that you could do to ultimately harden your cybersecurity posture, or your physical security posture. And then there's the aggregate kind of rolled up and consolidated. Okay, here are the findings that we've observed across the state of Arizona. At the end of the day, it's apparent to obviously everyone in the room. If you're here today, it's obvious that you're treating the discipline of cybersecurity seriously. What I think the biggest lesson learned that I impart from participating and leading this program over the last couple of years is that this requirement, as it were, to be careful and be cautious, avoid falling into this the thought that you could do the same thing twice for the same type of customer, and expect the same result. Same type of assessment is going to return different types of results, and oftentimes what worked with one community may or may not work with a different community. And so in this instance, through these vignettes, you're looking at two totally different approaches to provide a more granular level of cybersecurity awareness to state decision makers, but ultimately both of them accomplished what we set out to accomplish, which was to provide that information. So at that point, I'll stop for any questions. Lunch crowd. Such a strong time to give a presentation. I really do appreciate your time this morning. I hope the folks online found it compelling, interesting. I'll be around for questions outside afterwards.